All right, welcome to another episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Today we have Chris Boutté. He's a Las Vegas-based author, influencer, and podcaster. He's the author of Cancelled, Inside YouTube Cancel Culture, multiple mental health books, and he often contributes to wellness publications such as Thrive Global and Tiny Buddha. Chris reads hundreds of nonfiction books each year and speaks with authors on a diverse range of subjects at the popular the Rewired Soul Podcast. And you can also find his expert quotes in publications such as Vox, Insider, and Vice. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Thanks for
Absolutely, man. So, all right, let's begin with your journey. How did you become, or how did you go from a drug rehabilitation counselor to podcast extraordinaire?
Well, first, so I don't get canceled again. I was more of I'll use the word peer support specialist.
I got you.
Just because I'm not licensed, but yeah. No, I got sober after destroying my life in 2012. Like, I hit that rock bottom where I had like a less than 20% chance of living. My drug of choice was prescription opioids. It started with alcohol. I come from an alcoholic family. My mom's been sober since 2005-ish, so she helped me get sober. But anyways, to kind of shorten the story, after I got sober, I got sober through 12-step programs. I had no money, no health insurance, nothing. So the only option for me was 12-step programs because they're free. And they teach you that the best way to stay sober is to help other people. Right. So when I was about maybe 2 or 3 years sober, just some serendipity came my way, and I ended up starting to work at a drug and alcohol rehab center here in Vegas. But it was like a luxury rehab. Like, we're talking like massage therapy, like basketball courts, like the whole
like passages.
Yeah. They had like a 5-star chef, and like it was crazy, right? And so I'm coming in there. Like I had to get sober with nothing. Like, I was living in a sober living house with like 17 other guys and like eating ramen on food stamps. So yeah, I was working in that rehab, and it was great helping people, but you also get a lot of entitled like rich people too. And eventually I was like, you know what? Because I did groups, I did like one-on-one, like peer support type stuff. And people liked what I had to say, and they enjoyed my group. So I decided to start a YouTube channel that ended up blowing up before all the bad things happened that I'm sure we'll dive into. And yeah, just after I was canceled on YouTube, I wanted to understand what was happening. My mom's a psychologist, so I don't know if that runs in the family too. But I just I've always been fascinated with human behavior. So when I got canceled, I'm like, what the hell is going on? And I just started reading a ton of books, and eventually I was like, I have a lot of questions too. So I'm like, maybe I'll start a podcast, have some authors come on, and that's where I'm at today.
Wow, man. Yeah. So, just for the kind of prospective creatives in terms of our listenership, right? So, because people are always wondering, like, how would I go about starting a YouTube channel? Like, what would I talk about? What are people actually interested in? What do they want to hear, right? How did you come up with the ideas that you had for your channel?
So one of my day job, I work in like digital marketing and stuff like that too, and I have a background in like SEO, so that helped. But yeah, for anybody who wants to start any type of content, like I tell them, like, just do it. Like, my YouTube channel, I legit started with my cell phone, right? Like, I just took out my cell phone. I got like a little like $5 tripod for my cell phone, and I just started recording videos. Mainly, I aside from trying to reach more people who like didn't have the opportunity to go to treatment, like that's why I wanted to start it and reach people. But yeah, like, you just start creating stuff, and I like a lot of my content, like even my writing and stuff, I'm like, how is nobody talking about this? Why is nobody, like, if I can't find it, I'm like, what's going on? Like, even most recently, my son and I have gotten like really into like Legos and like customizations and stuff, and I've had a million questions. And like, people are like, oh, the internet is so huge, you can find anything. No, I can't find anything. So I'm like, I'm holding myself back from starting like a side Lego channel with my son. But anyways, people have questions. And if you just start making content, to answer questions and, help people, like, I'm all about like providing value. Like, whenever I'm making a YouTube video or podcast, I'm like, what is the listener or viewer getting out of this, right? Because people's time is valuable. We're all busy, have a million things to do. And so I try to keep that in mind. And that's kind of where I suggest people start if they want to make content. Because if you're just like trying to hop on like, oh, I'm going to be like the next like huge YouTuber, right? It's like, good luck, you know? But if you're trying to provide something of value to the person, like there's much better chances of you like reaching the people you want to reach, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, doing that creates a purpose for you, essentially, right? I mean, if you're just trying to become a YouTuber, that's not a strong enough purpose. You might try a few times, maybe even be consistent for a little bit and then give up. But if you have a real purpose, like you want to really help people, that keeps you in the game, even when things aren't looking good. I mean,
oh yeah, for sure.
And depends, you know, your own value system, what looks good, what doesn't look good. But I mean, for example, we've been podcasting, let's say, close to 2 years now.
Yeah, since 2019. Yeah, April 2019.
Yeah. So like what keeps us going is that same what you're saying, like offering value, right? I mean, it's not about always, I mean, we care about things like metrics, how many people is this reaching?
I'm more than Alan, by the way. He's the noble one in this respect. Yeah, he's like you. He's like, oh, yeah. He's like, what are we giving the audience? Where it was like, how many viewers do we have?
Yeah, well, it's a weird thing because like you should care about how many people you reach if you genuinely want to reach that many people. I'm trying to like sink that into my own head because originally it's all about, you know, you think, okay, I just want to concentrate on giving the value, right? And then if something comes as a symptom of it, like some kind of success, views, and all of that, then that's a symptom. But you try to make that like your, you know, main driving purpose. But he's right in terms of balancing me out, which is like, okay, but we need to find ways to reach people. Like you shouldn't do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result, right? That's right. That would be
insanity.
Crazy. Right? So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, that kind of balance and fine line that you two are talking about, that's actually kind of what led to my cancellation, right? Because I always say this, right? Like, because there's like, you know, people like, sometimes people accuse content creators like, oh, you're just doing it for the views, right? Or whatever. And what I always tell people is nobody sits down in front of a microphone, in front of a camera. Nobody sits down in front of their keyboard to write an article or book and says, you know what? I hope this doesn't reach anybody. You know what I mean? Like we all create content because we want to reach people. And, you know, the original goal of my channel was, how do I reach as many people as possible? Like last year, we had a record number of overdose deaths, right? For every 100,000, for all those 100,000 people plus who died of overdose, there's countless family members who are affected too. Like, how do I reach them? How do I talk to them? How do I reach the family members who have an addicted loved one out there and they don't know what to do, right? So like, so there's like this balance between like your noble like intentions and aligning your values and saying like, well, the reason I'm doing this is to reach people so I can help them, so I can provide them that value. You know what I mean? So it's this weird fine line that you have to walk too, because sometimes, you know, you stray away from that initial value system, you start focusing more, right? Because like my channel within a year blew up to like 100,000 subscribers. You know what I mean? So like there were times when my value system kind of got off track because I'm like, oh yeah, you know, and it started paying me full time too. So like it's difficult. It's part of the, you know, just that human experience trying to balance these things and be the
because you could easily replace one addiction with the other.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's my life story, you know.
I hear you.
But I can relate, by the way. By the way, there's a lot of areas we can go, but I do relate. I did have I guess I won't say specifically who, but I knew somebody very close to me who was in the grips of addiction, right? And the way that affected me and the family in terms of just putting as many resources we could as possible, as much time as possible into trying to either lecture that person or get them the right help, or when they were at their worst, maybe stealing things, letting them still stay with you anyway, and then having those things stolen, and then balancing, like, do you react to this and like give into that impulse to, you know, kick them out, which you shouldn't. Like, for example, I try to be that guy who's like, okay, no, you don't ever cut off family. Like, this is the disease, or this is the ego, like different ways of thinking about it. Like, it's not the actual person. It feels like, at least, like, it feels like they're taken over by like that addiction. So yeah, if I had known, like, I didn't actually know that you were talking about that kind of stuff and like giving that kind of value. So if I had known when I was, when I needed that would have been great. And if anyone, you know, who's listening needs advice on that's incredible that, you know, that you give that.
Well, Can I also just piggyback that with a question then? So Chris,
Mhm.
was it that when you were working like, counseling or kind of whatever the position is called, right? Is it that you found that there was sort of this sort of gap in insight that people had, that, kind of the discussions that you were having with some of your clients there, that it's sort of like you were giving them information that you saw that in, whatever, quote unquote, mainstream, the mainstream public didn't really have, which is sort of what spurred your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's a few things like like speaking of like ego and stuff. When I got sober, I had to learn how to check my ego and this whole idea of like, I know everything. I know what's best. I know what's best for myself and everybody. And even just growing up, like I was always the guy that everybody came to for advice and everything like that. So like I had to really humble myself when I got sober. But anyways, I just started to notice that I connected with people in treatment. I used to do, we had family weekends because like 90% of our clients came from out of state. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's something I usually recommend to people, like not, always out of state, but getting out of your normal habitat. Right. Like I was in Las Vegas. I was a drug addict and alcoholic in Las Vegas. I've been sober in Las Vegas, but to just get sober, I had to leave. But most of us drug addicts, we can find stuff wherever we go. Right. But I left Vegas. I got sober in California, then moved back to be with my son and all that. But like as far as like, the mainstream conversation and everything like that, like something I noticed when doing family weekends was a lot of family members didn't understand. Like there's this idea, especially from family members, like a lot of the content I made was to help people understand not just the addict in their life, but somebody struggling with mental health issues and stuff. Because, for example, parents beat themselves up when their kid becomes addicted, right? What did I do wrong? Right? What could I have done better? Why did they do this? And then there's the balance between enabling and setting boundaries. So, I noticed it a lot when I was doing family groups that a lot of family members didn't know how to deal. But then also with the addicts, like something I often tell people, because a lot of addicts, they'll be sober for like a week. They're like, why doesn't my family trust me? Like you were talking, like people like steal and lie and stuff. Like, I'm like, you've been sober for a week. You put your family through hell for like 10 years and now you expect to re-earn their trust. So those are certain things where it's like, there's these misconceptions that, oh, I'm just going to get sober and life's going to be better. Like for me, like right now, my son's in the other room, right? He's playing video games, waiting for me so we can work on some Legos and stuff. But when I got sober, his mom didn't trust me for like a good year or two, right? Because I was doing shady stuff. I was getting high around him when I had him on the weekends and all sorts of stuff. So I had to learn to empathize. But anyways, to answer your question, there's a lot of things where it's like, there's misconceptions, there's ideas from the family, from the addicts and stuff. And a lot of people just resonated with that when I did groups or one-on-ones and like, hey, that clicked. And as I worked at the treatment center, part of my job was to call people and follow up after they left. And you just start hearing things of like, hey, what you said really helped me. Hey, this one thing you said really helped me, right? So part of it's balance, like checking that ego rather than being like, I'm the man, I like help save lives, right? But you take that in and then you say, okay, maybe I do have something to offer and I want to get it out there to more people because I'm saying something that might not be talked about too much. So maybe I was offering a different perspective, but also to your other question about people creating content, everybody has a unique perspective. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of repeat content out there and that really annoys me. But when you provide your unique perspective, your unique voice, your experience and stuff, like you're going to resonate, you're going to click with someone, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you remember some of your first YouTube videos? What were they about?
So I got really into mindfulness around that time too. And my son, God, how old was he? But I started teaching my son mindfulness at a very young age because when I learned mindfulness meditation, because I've been diagnosed with like depression and anxiety and I've been on medications and my anxiety kept flaring up like crazy. And I was at the max amount of medications I could take before getting on something addictive like Xanax, right? And, I don't take any kind of narcotic medications. But then I forgot how I stumbled across it. I was hearing about mindfulness everywhere, and I found a book called The Mindful Path to Addiction Recovery, and I read it, and a common experience you hear from people is like, I meditated and nothing happened. I swear to you, the first time I meditated, it was a body scan, and I was just like, I get it. I get why people do this now. So I learned meditation. I started teaching it to my son. So a lot of my early videos were about mindfulness just for mental health as a whole. And then also how I taught it to my son, right? Because he used to be very emotional and nervous and all sorts of stuff. And mindfulness helped him learn how to regulate his emotions and all that. And like now he's 13. So years, like at least 5 years later, and like he never, like he's not like having these like mental breakdowns, but he is 13, so just wait until the hormones start hitting and he starts running around being a lunatic. But yeah, my initial videos were a lot of mindfulness, and then I did a lot of education about mental health, because I loved learning about like why do I get depressed, right? Is it a chemical imbalance? Is it life circumstances? Why do I get anxious? What's going on there? What triggers it? So I started educating people about the different studies I learned and stuff like that, because that stuff always helped me.
Yeah, so it's like you kind of took whatever you guys talked about in those, like I'm assuming there's meetings, right? Kind of, for lack of a better word, right? You would take whatever you guys talked about in those meetings and you would sort of bring them again out to the mainstream, because the idea is like, I mean, for the most part, people don't know what goes on behind the scenes of AA meetings. So like, when we had the two Jameses on, so we had two of our friends on from so they have their own, it's like what is it called? Dynamite?
Oh, okay, so yeah, there's a center they both worked at. One of them, I believe still works there.
Yeah,
it's called Dynamite Youth Center, I believe.
Yeah,
and yeah, it's a rehabilitation facility, and both of our friends, they used to be incredibly addicted also with opioids and stuff like that, and they both both in recovery, both are doing incredibly well right now, and we had them on the show to talk about their experience and what that was like. And so, and it's like for a lot of people, especially even me, right? So I've never, even though I'm in the mental health profession, I don't technically know what happens behind AA meetings. Like, I mean, I'll have clients tell me and whatnot, but I've never actually had firsthand experiences. So it's kind of interesting to have had them on the show and to give these firsthand accounts, because some of those stories, right, none of them were watered down from what I remember. None of them were watered down. I mean, they gave you like the bare bones of everything that happened for them, right? Obviously in those meetings. And then they even talked about what happens in the family meetings, right? The family of addicts. So it's like, wow, man, yeah, you look at this stuff and, people kind of think of this as it's pretty like esoteric to the mainstream. So a lot of us, like, again, even me as a professional, we don't really know exactly what goes on behind those meetings. So I can imagine, right, if there was, there were not just, I mean, stories, which are obviously useful, but also kind of ways of dealing and advice in terms of like ways of dealing with addiction and, advice for families. I can imagine how there could be a YouTube channel, right, where again, a lot of this esoteric information is given to the public that they couldn't have possibly have known otherwise. Right. Like just to tag that a little bit. I wondered this, especially around the time when I had that person who was really addicted and close to me. I remember thinking, like, how many people just get fed up and kick the person out, or no longer deal with them, or think that those behaviors that person is doing in the grips of addiction is that person, like, in their true nature, right? It's crazy to me, because like some people get lucky. Like sometimes you'll accidentally do the right thing, right? You might keep that person nearby, you might help get them treatment, and eventually maybe things do actually work out okay. Or sometimes there's a failure, you try again, another failure, try again, and until maybe something works out, and it could randomly work out nicely. But yeah, there's so many people that if they knew that, like, okay, maybe that's the disease talking right now, like that's not really your son who genuinely wouldn't have stolen this from you, or wouldn't have committed this crime or whatever. I'm just
it's not as simple as like, well, this person is just pure free will and he has the choice to just stop whatever.
It's it's something I try to teach people about with mental health as a whole, right? Like there's one mental illness that's highly stigmatized, which is borderline personality disorder. And that's something I started learning about a lot. But speaking of mindfulness, with BPD, there's massive issues with emotional regulation, right? And there's this tendency, I think it's just part of human nature. We see it with political stuff and everything. Like we see behaviors and stuff as that person, right? Not a symptom of something else that's going on. So whether it's addiction or, even like depression, right? Like somebody might, oh, you don't like me. No, that person is depressed, you know? Oh, this person doesn't want to hang out with me. No, that person is socially anxious, right? So we tend to like, we get offended by the actions people do. We can't like separate those two things. So that's one of the reasons I think education is so important. But like with addiction, it's really difficult because you're living with this life or death issue. And as I hear like you talking about like your experience with someone in your life and everything, like I've witnessed just in those 3 years working at the treatment center, I had 80 former clients die. Right. And that's a rough estimate. That's probably lowballing it a little bit, but we're talking relapse and overdose was the most common. We're talking suicide, because when people get sober, Russell Brand, I know we're probably going to touch on him. He had an amazing quote in his book, Recovery, that I was like, yep, that's what it's like, where he was talking about like, for a lot of us, the drugs were the only thing keeping us alive. It was the only thing giving us purpose. Like when I woke up in the morning, right, I was like, okay, well, at least I have drugs, you know, but everything else sucked. But yeah, so many people die, and especially with addiction recovery, and it's similar with mental health, there's not this like one size fits all, right? Like when I was doing groups, like I come from a 12-step background, but I'm of the belief of literally whatever helps you, do it. Like if 12 steps don't work for you, I don't care. There's stuff like smart recovery, refuge recovery actually uses like Buddhist philosophy. So I got into that because of a lot of mindfulness and meditation. And I got into like Buddhist philosophy once I understood more about mindfulness and where it came from. But yeah, I'm, you know, and even with like depression and anxiety, like, hey, does CBT work? Cool, do that. It doesn't work, maybe exercise works for you. I had one client and physical activity was the best thing for her. She got back into long distance running. Now she's like she does like the Spartan races and everything. She's been sober probably like 5 or 6 years. Like she came into treatment while I was there and she's still sober. Like I follow her on Instagram and stuff. And she does like Spartan races and all those insane things, but she never goes to meetings. And that's what keeps her sober. You know what I mean? So that's the other thing I try to educate both people and their families on is like, hey, find what works for you and dive into that. You know what I mean? Because even when I got sober, there were certain meetings that I liked and didn't like. I'm one of the atheist/agnostics in 12-step programs. There's a lot of these ideas, like once you go in there, like you're going to become like a Jesus freak or something. That's a misconception I had, right? Then I met a guy who's like, hey, I've been sober 5 years. I'm an atheist and I work 12-step programs. I'm like, dope. I can do that too. You know what I mean? So there's things to like learn, get yourself educated about, find what works for you and go there. I call it like this menu of like mental health or menu of addiction recovery. Like you don't need to have everything on the menu, but just find something and do that. You know?
Yeah. So what you're basically saying is one size doesn't necessarily fit all.
Yeah, exactly. And people just need to
there's
experiment.
Right. And there's like a method, depending like what you resonate with, that's going to work for you. For example, something that I liked is the book, The Power of Now, right? By Eckhart Tolle.
He loves it.
Yeah. So, I mean, by the way, there's a guy named Jeff Brown who I don't know if I've ever mentioned on the show before, who actually criticizes his work and actually has pretty decent criticisms of it. But otherwise, though, I still like the work though. And yeah, they talk about like identifying with the mind, like how ego wants to identify with different thoughts, but whenever you're in the moment, you couldn't possibly identify with the ego. So like, kind of like that thing you're talking about at the beginning with the mindfulness, like body scan. I guess like while you are scanning your body, like you're putting your attention in all these different parts, you can't necessarily be as attached or as in anxiety or thinking about what's going to happen or what happened before. So yeah, that stuff like definitely worked for me. But for other people, like you said, it could be maybe, exercise or maybe another hobby or something like that, or meetings, you know? So yeah.
And then often I would even think of these as like step-by-step processes, because sometimes what I find is that when people start feeling a little bit better, then they're allowed to, or at least they allow themselves, rather, they kind of allow themselves to sort of push forward, where it's like, let's say if you start exercising and you start feeling better, then maybe you'll start attending an AA meeting, right? Then you attend an AA meeting, you see that opening up isn't so difficult, that vulnerability, maybe not so it's such a bad thing. Then maybe you'll even attend individual therapy, right? And then sort of so on and so forth. It's like, as long as you get the ball rolling, sometimes with just something, it could kind of springboard you into that thing that's the hardest, right? So if let's say you struggle, so it's different, right? So some people struggle with group meetings the most just because they're like, oh, I don't want to open up in front of a bunch of strangers. For some people, it's individual counseling, right? Because they're like, well, at least in the group meeting, people kind of share my problems, right? So it's not that scary. Whereas with a therapist, it's like, oh my God, it's this authority figure. I don't want her or him to judge me.
Yeah.
So, but it depends, right? It's sort of like once you get the ball rolling, it becomes a little bit easier. But I can also, but I mean, I guess, yeah, what I'm saying is that I could see how this could be like a springboard. But I think the point that all of you guys are making is that if you pick like this thing, like that's at least in the beginning a little bit easy, right? Even if that's the thing for you, which is great if it's terminal, but even if it's not, it could be the thing that could kind of create not a plateau. It could get you to a higher plateau, right? As long as you obviously keep going.
Yeah, one of my favorite books, and I had him on the pod, like not even on the podcast. He was a guest on the YouTube channel, but it's Dr. Alex Korb. He's a neuroscientist, and he wrote this book called The Upward Spiral, and it's all about the neuroscience behind like dealing with your depression, right? And kind of like with what you're saying, like our brain loves when you accomplish just even small goals. So like with depression, one of the main things that just absolutely sucks about depression is the lack of motivation, right? So it's like, do something, do anything, right? It's like, well, I don't want to do anything. But in his book, something that, I learned was when you accomplish small goals, your brain's like, nice, and gives you a little reward for that. So you start smaller, like you're talking about, like just do something. I'll never forget. I had this one client, he came in, his family was like just super rich. I forgot what company they owned. I couldn't even say if I remember. But anyway, he came in, he was just so entitled, wouldn't do anything. And I remember him coming into my office, and because often the counselors, because we had a lot of therapists who were not in recovery. So they'd be like, hey, Chris, you want to try talking to this kid? I'm like, sure. But anyways, he came in there and I'm like, so what's up, man? And he's telling me all the things, like, I don't want to go to 12-step meetings. I don't want to call a sponsor. I don't want to do this. And he just rattled off this huge list. And I just looked at him. I'm like, okay, what will you do? Right. And like something clicked in his head and he's like, oh, okay, well, here's the things I'm willing to do. And I'm like, then do them. Okay, just do those things. So it's like sometimes like we just, because of that negative bias we all have, like we'll just focus on all these like things like, oh, I'm not going to do this, or this is terrible. It's like, okay, well, what do you like doing? Do that, right? Because when I first started going to AA meetings, like I'm an introvert. I used to have a ton of social anxiety. Like I can do these one-on-one conversations, but in a large group, like I get drained really quick, right? And my first year in 12-step meetings, I just sat in the back and I just listened. I didn't say a damn thing, right? And that helped. I sat there and I heard these stories and I'm like, oh, I'm not alone, right? I thought I was crazy and it's just me going through this. No, there's a bunch of people, and I was going to meetings every single day. It was my first year. I was fortunate enough to not work, so I was just able to focus on my recovery. But yeah, just sitting there and listening. And then like I started pushing myself. Like I said, I hated being around people. I'm still not a huge fan. Before we hopped on, I was talking about living in Las Vegas. I never go to the Strip. Being in crowded places is just my nightmare, right? But I started forcing myself to go out and just like, because a lot of people go to coffee after 12-step meetings. I would go there and I would just stand there silent, be uncomfortable, but I was being around people. You know what I mean? Because in addiction, like we'll just sit there and isolate alone and stuff. So I was just forcing myself to do the opposite of these things. But it was just these little small things, and it opened me up. Like you said, it gave me confidence. It helped me see that I can do things, because how many times we're like, oh, I could never do that. Then you do it, you just disproved your own theory. So now you can do more, So there's so many different routes. And it's one of the reasons I love just talking about this stuff, because I was hopeless, like going to sleep every night just hoping I wouldn't wake up in the morning, right? And now I live this like awesome life. I get to do my podcast. I get invited by you wonderful gentlemen. Like life is dope. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you know what's so funny? I mean, maybe funny is not the right word, but it kind of sucks, is that the way our culture looks at pride is that like you're either sort of, if let's say if it's religion, right, then you're sort of a sinner because you think you're godlike. But if obviously if we're talking about secularism, then the idea is like, well, you're narcissistic, right? And you also have like this sort of idea even in the sports world where it's like this sort of famous, I guess now, John Madden quote, where he said something along the lines of like, oh, well, self-praise is for losers, right? Be a winner. And I'm like, no, no, if you've ever dealt with people who are mentally ill, all they do is blame and criticize themselves. There's no pride. There's no self-praise. So it's like, yes, I get it. On the one hand, you're saying that excessive praise sucks, meaning that if you have like social media feeds that are saturated with selfies and like, kind of tweets or whatever of how wonderful people are, I get it, fine, right? But when we're talking about just this sort of notion of pride, the fucked up thing about people who are mentally ill is they have none of it. So if you're trying to get this person to actually feel a little bit proud of something, they'll give you a million reasons why that doesn't count. So I can even put myself in the mind of, let's say in this case, right, somebody who's an addict and putting themselves in, let's say, some social situation, right? Let's say, you're struggling and you're in the grips with addiction and, you're going to a diner, right? And all you're doing is just, you're sitting there, you're ordering food, right? You come to your therapist and your therapist says, wow, man, oh my God, remember yesterday you were so afraid of going out and being in front of people. And then what's the addict going to say? Yeah, but I actually didn't talk to anybody. And it's like, no, that's not the thinking that we
celebrate
want people.
Those small wins.
Yes. We don't want people to discount the little victories. So it's like, look, man, even if you want to post a selfie on social media and say, hey, here's me sitting at a diner, do that. Please do that. Get people to give you comments. Yeah, go ahead.
And this is the winner effect, right?
Yeah, tell us what that is.
Right. Well, it's essentially, it's probably what they talk about in the Upward Spiral book, right? And what we're now talking about, which is you would stack these little wins on top of each other. And then what it does is your brain rewards you every time that you do something that you count as a win. So for example, just being in a social situation, whether you speak or you don't speak, if you're just listening, well, if you're there when otherwise you never would have gone there, okay, that's a win. Even if you didn't speak, that's like a 0.1% improvement. Okay, you did it again, another 0.1% improvement. Maybe this time you spoke a little. You maybe didn't talk to anybody. Maybe it was actually a mistake or it wasn't a good interaction. Still better than nothing. And then all these little things, they just stack up and they give you confidence to sort of craft like a new sort of identity for yourself in another way of speaking. And you can move away from an old way of being to a new way of being with using that.
And this sort of an example comes to mind with one of my clients. I remember, so he was really terrified of like talking to women and approaching them like at a bar, club, whatever, right? So he has this one day where he's like, like this girl ended up coming and sitting next to me, right? He's like, I didn't really talk to her. Then so she sort of like left, but then sometime later, right, I came up to her, we had a really good conversation, right? But he's like, damn, man, I fucked the whole thing up. I was like, why? Did you say something offensive? He's like, no, I didn't ask for her number. My friends were like, oh, you idiot. Why? What did you do? How did you not ask for a number? What the fuck, right? And then I'm like, wait, hold on a second. So you're telling me, right, that you went from, hey, I'm this guy who never approaches anybody ever, to now I'm not only approaching, this woman who I clearly don't know, right? I'm having a good conversation with her. I'm keeping her engaged, right? We're having this great back and forth banter. It lasts for a reasonable amount of time. And yes, okay, literally the only mistake I made was not asking for her number. But like, I was like, did you think that she liked you? And he's like, well, I mean, she seemed really into it. It seemed like she was having a good time. So I was like, wow. So that like debunks your whole myth of that, women aren't interested in you, right? So yes, obviously I get it. If we're thinking about it in black and white terms, yes, you didn't get her number, right? But think about this, right? Think about the fact that number one, this woman liked you, clearly meaning that other women would find you appealing. And number two is you actually have the ability to talk to them. Like, when did that happen, right? So if we put you in this situation the next time, right? And obviously you tell yourself, oh man, I'm just going to fuck it up again and not ask for a number. I'm like, you're probably not going to want to do it, right? But if you put yourself in this situation the next time and tell yourself something like, oh my God, yeah, I got a girl to be interested in me last time. I'm like, maybe the next time you could kind of push forward and take that one final step.
Are you your friend in this?
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Fine, it's my stuff. No, it's actually, this is legit a client.
It's one of the reasons, like, I don't like, just put this like front and center, but it's one of the reasons I talk to so many people on my podcast about like just scientific thinking, right? Because that's a huge aspect of your mental health, because like science is updating your beliefs based on new evidence. That's exactly what we're talking about here, right? Like you're talking about, this guy and stuff. It's like, no, your hypothesis that you're somebody who cannot do this is wrong. So now you need to update your belief based on that. And like you're saying, you start stacking up these little wins. No, I'm not somebody who can't do this. I'm somebody who can do this. So like, there's so much that just like blends in together. It's why like, I learned this going to meetings, because I used to go to meetings where sometimes you'll be there for an hour and you're like, this meeting sucked. But I learned there's something you could take away from every single situation, right? Like maybe at a meeting where some jerk was talking, I'm like, well, I don't want to be like that guy. Boom, I learned something. But with like books and everything, with articles I read, I'm like, what can I take away from this? And I'll bring that into my own life. Like, you know, when I read books on scientific thinking, I'm just like, oh, I can use that with my own mental health. Like if I get nervous when I'm gonna, you know, because sometimes I talk in front of big groups. I've done like local events here in Las Vegas for like mental health events. And like, you know, I'm like, oh, I can't do this. Then I do it. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I got to update that beliefs. You know what I mean? So there's so much that just like overlaps and we can just pull in to improve, you know, just our own well-being. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. And so just going back to obviously some of your work, right? What was it that you took away from Russell Brand?
So, man, what I obviously knew of Russell Brand with his like, you know, comedy and movies and stuff. And I was like, he's all right, you know, but, his book Recovery came out while I was working in treatment. And like, I just loved it because one of the things I learned really early on, right, was a lot of my friends started coming to me for advice. They saw, because I used to have like massive anger issues and I was just all over the place. And a lot of my friends, when they saw me get sober, they're like, wow, Chris, like, you know, you're doing a lot better. So they would come to me for advice and I would give them advice. And it was from 12-step meetings, but I wouldn't tell them. It's almost like hiding the vegetables, you know, like but yeah. So anyways, I started to realize there's so much that you could take from 12-step meetings that everybody could use. And when I came across Russell Brand's book, Recovery, that's kind of what he was talking about, because he breaks down all 12 steps and he like really dives into them. And, you know, not only is he talking to addicts, but like anybody could pick up that book and say, oh, well, you know, this isn't a bad idea. Like one of them is, you know, one of the steps is like make amends, right? It's like, that's like everybody should do that. If you're a dick, go apologize for being a dick and move on with your life, right? But anyways, that's when I really like clicked with him. Like sometimes it gets a little too profound for my liking, but I liked what he had to say. He aligns with a lot of my opinions, like politically, right? Like, cause I'm like big, like, you know, anti-capitalism and all this stuff. So I really started getting into him. And then I took a break from him. Like I loved his podcast too. His conversations with people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson. And he had, you know, he has a bunch of like meditation teachers on there too, like Sharon Salzberg. I loved her work. And then I kind of took a break. And then like recently I'm like kind of side-eyeing Russell Brand, but I think just because of his YouTube content. But there's this weird like political ideology that's like coming to fruition where you're like getting like very like left-leaning people that are kind of overlapping with people on the right. So he has a lot of stuff about vaccines and everything like that. But his videos, they're becoming very clickbaiting, but like I get it. Like we were talking about early, right? Like if you have a message and you want to reach people, especially on YouTube, you got to clickbait. So I'm like, okay, I forgive you, Russell. So it's this weird thing, like my opinion of Russell Brand literally doesn't matter, right? But I look at him skeptically sometimes. I'm like, okay, Russell, are we still on the same page? Or are you like drifting away? You know, like what's going on? But I do think he's a good person, good head on his shoulders. And yeah, like if he writes another book, I've read most of his books, I think. I love his writing and I wish he wrote more books, but yeah, he's an interesting guy.
That's crazy. I actually have the same exact opinion as you. So that's so the funny thing is like, so I got into him a little bit differently. So I first got into him just from seeing him on different shows and like how he would be profound and articulate certain ideas. He sounded like such a smart guy, and he's a comedian at the same time, also charismatic, good with the girl. I was like, all right, this guy's cool. Like I want to copy. This is like when I was early 20s, you know, I want to copy him a little bit. And then the book Recovery started coming out. He's on Bill Maher. He has really cool people on his podcast and all of that. And actually, I have the same thing. I haven't actually listened to him in a while as far as like a podcast goes, but yeah, I have been also side-eyeing him. I do notice like he got way more clickbaity in the last year and a half, maybe two, something like that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's cool.
Wait, can I ask? Because like I'm actually not familiar with this. What do you guys mean by he's being clickbaity? Like he does things like the way, I don't know, to The Secret of Life or something.
So like before it used to be like you would just have like it's literally this is the guest on, and it's like the title would be probably the guest's name and just Russell, whatever the podcast name, and it wasn't like anything that nuts. But then now the thumbnails are like, is Joe Rogan a racist? Or
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. It's not
I
literally
pulled
that.
him. Yeah, I pulled him up on my other monitor, and like the first one that he released yesterday says, "Trudeau, is this your liberal hero?" Right?
Oh.
It has like the faces, like, right, and then like this one, it has him going like this, and there's a picture of a Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It says, "How did they cover this up?" Question mark, exclamation point.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's the thing. So I bet you the content. I'm sure the content is great when you actually listen to it. I'm sure he's nuanced about it and all of that. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
It's just that, yes, that's what I'm noticing too. And then I haven't clicked on it. Yeah.
I'll tell you this. One of the reasons I empathize with the clickbait stuff, one of the many reasons I got canceled was I started clickbaiting, right? Because again, I wanted to reach and help as many people as possible. So I got a little clickbaity, and that's when my channel exploded, right? So like, it's kind of like the bait on the hook. It's like bringing people in, and then when they actually watch the content, boom, there's value. Like people came in thinking I was just going to be like some like guy like talking like sensationalist nonsense, but they came in and I was like talking science and my personal experience and stuff like that. And that, I can't tell you this, like I've seen a lot of people criticize Russell Brand lately, and they basically do what I did, right? Well, they'll just be like, look at him, and they'll just read off his titles and thumbnails. That's literally, in the digital world of YouTube, judging a book by its cover, right? Like that's literally what it is. It's like, and that's another pet peeve of mine, since I read so much. I can't tell you how much I hate people who criticize books they haven't read. I just want to scream. I'm just like, no, consume the content, right? If you hate it afterwards, cool, right? Like consume Russell Brand's content. If you think it's terrible, awesome, you know? But yeah, that's an issue I have. Like, I think, you know, like with all the polarization and everything going on, to have such strong feelings for someone and not know their nuanced thoughts is baffling to me. Like, I just don't get, like, we're all just people trying to, you know, live day to day for this short time we have on this earth. So to have such strong feelings of disdain for someone without even knowing their full range of thoughts is baffling to me. And that's like something I hope to get across, like with my podcast and the range of guests I have and the books I read. It's like, listen, just give them a chance, listen, because we're all humans, and you start to see where people are coming from and all that stuff.
No, same here, because like the way people sort of just bandwagon onto like, this is the person to hate today, or this person said this in the news. They don't really read the whole article, or maybe they will read the whole article, but they won't get into the context of what might have, like what that person is about, right? So here's the thing. So while I'm a big Joe Rogan fan, right? Like I listened to Joe Rogan since before he even started his podcast. Like back in the day, he was on Opie and Anthony, and Opie and Anthony was kind of like Howard Stern.
Love me some Opie and Anthony.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay, that's cool. Yeah. So, wow, that's really awesome. I should probably get back to that. But anyway, so yeah, so Rogan was on there, and people like Patrice O'Neill and like all these like really popular, great comedians. And this podcast was this radio show was incredibly unique because it was like a hang, like people just sort of did. It was basically like a podcast before podcasting came out. It was like these long form discussions. It wasn't like a pre-planned, like this is a radio bit that we're doing or anything like that. You get real honest conversations there. And so I was introduced to Rogan there and got into him there, and then saw his podcast whenever it started on Ustream or whatever was the first thing. And then it actually started out pretty genuinely. Like he's just with his friends, he's joking around, has comedians on, eventually evolves to have like scientists on, psychologists, philosophers, people from whatever political persuasion. And then it grows into this huge thing, right? Over a period of time, over a period of 10 years, I think more. And I don't know, it's like I saw the like that compilation thing that came out where he's saying the N-word, right? And so we cannot deny that he said it, and it's wrong to use the word, right? But also I would add, you know, there's a context that he was saying it, that they pulled it out of. Maybe in one context he's saying how bad it is, or maybe saying this is as bad as saying this other racial slur. But then eventually he still makes anyway a joke, some kind of a really racist joke about walking into a movie theater and it's like Planet of the Apes or something like that. And it's like, it's messed up. Like he even acknowledges it's racist in the next sort of second. Yeah. But yeah, it's weird. It's weird to like, because when you look at this stuff, it really looks bad. Right. And especially to a mainstream audience, like you don't really look at, you know, what's the context he said this in? Is he joking? And does that even matter if he's joking? Right. Like another question. What else has he said regarding race? Has he ever been anti-racism, which he has been? He's had also people like somebody who was converting people from the KKK. Yeah, he had
Daryl Davis. Is that his name?
I believe so. Yeah, and so I don't know. It's like sometimes I would like to encourage people to sort of look at the nuance of who a person is before trying to necessarily cancel them. So
it's you know, especially with you know, the race and stuff. Like something I learned you know, when I got sober, right? Because I used to just catastrophize everything, and like I'm half Black, right? And like when I got sober, like something I teach, you know, people trying to get sober, like every day that I wake up, like I'm fighting for my life, right? Like if I have one drink, one drug, that can send me into a spiral that will kill me. My son loses his dad, my girlfriend loses her boyfriend, my parents lose their son, right? So like I don't have time for small, minute bullshit, right? So I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like I've had people say, like, because I look white as hell, right? So I'm like this undercover, like seeing what's going on, and people say some really racist stuff around me, and I'm like, hey, I'm half Black, and they're like, oh, you know. But sometimes I'm like the way I think, and I respect that everybody has their own opinions on racism, and you know, it's one of the reasons I talk about the culture wars a lot and stuff. But like, I grew up here in Las Vegas. A ton of Mormons. Mormons are typically very white, right? And my best friend's family was Mormon, and his family was like my family. Like my mom was a drug not a drug addict. She was addicted to alcohol. She messed with benzos every now and then, but anyways, she was an alcoholic. I stopped hanging out with her, seeing her that much. My dad worked all the time. His family was like my family, and his dad would say stuff, right? Like, because we played football. A lot of Black dudes on our football team, you know, they talk like, you know, with their slang and everything. And I love them and everything. But like his dad would be like, Chris, you're one of the good, like, you don't talk like that. You're one of the good ones and stuff, you know, and it's what people would call like a microaggression. But like, that shit's not going to keep me up at night. Like, I know he's a good guy. Like those guys, his whole family helped take care of me. Like, so, and his dad hung out with my dad, you know. I guess there's something to be discussed, like, was he actually looking down on my Black dad and all these other things? But I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. And when it comes to comedy, and that's all, we could spend hours talking about that. I give so much leeway to comedians. It's terrible. Like, because there's all the Dave Chappelle stuff, Joe Rogan, there's stuff on there. Like, this world is such a fucked up, crazy place, right? I need people who are just going to come out and help me escape and just make fun of everything. Like it's a different reality for me, right? But in Joe Rogan's situation, I also empathize, like almost like with Russell Brand, because my YouTube channel, I started making videos and I would reach like 10, 20 people. Then I started reaching like 100, 200 people, right? Out of nowhere, my videos are getting tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of views, right? Like if you guys woke up tomorrow and you became like the top 3 podcasts, like how would you deal with that, right? What responsibilities would you now have? You know, does it change the way you talk? Does it change the way that you have opinions? Because you're now reaching an insane amount of people. And something I talk with people about is, there's this line as a content creator that you cross without even knowing it. Like where your size, like that, right? Because you go from being nobody to somebody, like you said, like I you know, my friend got me into Opie and Anthony. He got real, like when Joe Rogan started his podcast, my friend was all in. And I don't know if you remember like the Rogan boards, like where his community would like, it was like a forum. Forums, they'd all like sit there and talk and stuff. Like Joe Rogan basically used to run this like out of his closet, right? And eventually, then out of nowhere, he's just number one, right? So I empathize with him because he always says that, like, hey, I'm just a guy. I like having conversations. It's like, cool. Like, I'm a huge advocate for free speech, say what you want and everything like that. But the ethical question I always have is, once you get to a certain size, how does that change your responsibility? You know, because while I do empathize with him that it blew up and, you know, now he's number one, at a certain point, you also got to say, like, hey, I'm the number one podcast in the world. I have a little bit of responsibility because I that's just one thing, because I love Rogan. I think he blew up because he was having conversations that other people wouldn't have. As everything got polarized, he's like, no, I'll bring Ben Shapiro on. I'll bring Jordan Peterson on. I'll bring Sam Harris on. I don't care, right? He's like, I'll ask him questions. So I respect that about him. But like, there's a certain point where it's like, okay, you're number one. You got to take a step back and just say, okay, what am I doing? How does this have an effect on people? Because I'm a huge reader of books on why we listen to people, why coming from my background in marketing too, how does influence work? And the bigger you are, the more trusted you are, even though there's no reason to believe that, right? Like, why am I going to take medical advice from like Kim Kardashian, you know? But there's something our brain says like, wait, she has a ton of money, right? She has a massive following. She must know something. Like, that's the way we evolved. So I think it's important that people understand that and they become a little bit more responsible for their influence. But I don't think enough people have that conversation. They're just like, he's a piece of shit. It's like, okay, well, let's talk a little bit, you know?
Wow, that actually makes me think, and this is going to sound so stupid. I'm going to say this anyway. This is actually kind of personal. Well, it is personal. So like, I remember when there were times, especially, I mean, thankfully not, and in the sort of near past, but in the distant past, where I would like break up with girls, right? And then people would be like, oh man, you were such a dick to her. And my response would be like, yeah, I don't think she cares. I'm like, it's not a big deal. I'm like, who am I? I'm like, why? She's just going to move on, right? And, you know, people be like, no, you're like being an asshole. But legit, in my mind, I was like, if I'm like breaking up with this person, I'm like, she probably doesn't care about me anyway, right? So why am I saying this? So with Rogan, I wonder if there's a part of him that still has that mindset of, oh, I'm Joe Rogan from like 2005. Why the fuck does anybody even listen to me, right? Why would I have any responsibility? I'm just this dumb shit, right? So where like the rest of the world is like, no, dude, you're actually up here in status, right? You have like a responsibility because, you know, we put you here in some way. Whereas in his mind, he's like, what are you talking? I'm not up here. He's like, I'm down here. I'm the moron, right? These are the experts, right? Don't even like take me seriously. So I know what kind of sort of I guess a little more of a nefarious kind of perspective could be something along the lines of like, well, you know, Rogan knows, and you know, he's sort of abdicating his responsibility because he's childish, right? Okay, maybe. I don't know that. I don't really know what's in his heart, right, per se, but I can see it from his perspective where it's not an excuse, where he's just literally telling himself like, hey, I'm not what these people think I am. I don't even really understand why they're taking me seriously. Because legit, if you were to put me in that situation and I had the mentality that I had as a teenager, I would have probably done the same thing. I would have been like, yeah, I don't care. Why is she even crying about me? I'm just like a piece of shit. Why would she even care? Go find, you're better than me. You go find somebody better. Like, you could easily do better than me. I don't even know how I'm breaking your heart right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would just add that like I agree with you. It could be that he doesn't realize how much status he has, but I would argue that he's a pretty balanced thinker, that he does probably take into consideration how much status he has. And people have probably said to him already the kind of conversation that we're having here in terms of like, you have a platform, you're giving this person a platform, like you have this tremendous responsibility. Right. So I think that's in his head. I just, the interesting thing is, imagine everybody, like somebody took something you said from like 5 years ago that maybe in the context of that time wasn't as powerful a thing to say, or is still powerful, but not as powerful. I'm not talking specifically the N-word. I'm just now being general. Maybe there are other comedians who've had this too, like Kevin Hart from didn't host the Oscars, I think, because they took a joke that he had from many years ago, which was like a joke about his son if he were gay or something like that. Which in the context of the time that he made that joke, I mean, even though it's not right, it still was something that's a little more accepted as a joke at the time, and that people would laugh at and all of that. So it's like, it's weird, like making people kind of pay for things that they've done in the past. Also not giving them credit to think that they're probably a different person now. that they also, like, if you do take something that, let's say somebody like a Rogan said it from the past, I mean, even if he apologizes, right, and makes some sort of a statement, it's not good enough for, I mean, or for some people it's good, for other people it's not good.
Yeah.
And then this kind of thing has a momentum to it when like people get into this sort of angry mob, and just people start to then just jump on, and like you said, like they'll judge a book by its cover and not try to be nuanced about it.
There's so much wrong with pulling up like old clips and stuff like that. Like, so first off, like I'm a recovering drug addict, right? Like you guys meeting me, like you're meeting the best version of me, right? Anybody listening to me is meeting, like I was not on YouTube, or I was on social media like Facebook, right, during my addiction, but like people need to understand I was a massive piece of shit. Like I was terrible. I was screwing over people, right? But how many people would get sober if I was just like, hey, you're a piece of garbage. You're always going to be a piece of garbage, and everybody's going to see you as a piece of garbage. No, we want to believe that people can grow and people can change. It's one of the reasons why I'm a huge advocate for prison reform. And I hate the fact that there's this, this cycle where people get out of prison, they can't get a job, they go back to crime, they go back into prison. It's like, no, how about we give people a chance and show them like, hey, maybe you can change, right? So when we're pulling up people's old stuff, we are sending this message that, hey, you are defined by whatever moment we choose in your entire life, right? Like, are we going to judge somebody like, hey, this person, crapped their pants as a baby and just label them that as their entire life? No, we grow, we learn, we change. But also, here's what drives me nuts, you guys. The fact that, like, especially like millennials, right? We want to act like 2000 to 2010 like never existed. Like, it used to be like normal. It used to be normal to just call your friends gay. Right? That's what everybody was doing, right? And now we know, hey, there's problems with that. This is wrong. There's an issue. So to pull things from that era, like Joe Rogan was the only person, and has anybody ever been like on Xbox Live? Do you know the N-bombs that people drop? It's crazy. Like, but one of the reasons I got into moral philosophy too, and there's some really interesting conversations coming up with online shaming and stuff, but the anonymity of the internet gives you this strange ability to take this moral high ground, because everybody knows who Joe Rogan is, but nobody knows who the hell you are. Nobody has all your clips. Nobody has all. So you can present this facade that you have never done anything. One of my favorite stories is, I don't know if you guys remember this, but this young girl, this young woman wore that Asian dress to prom. And this guy, he's like, hey, my culture isn't your problem, right? 5 minutes later, people pulled up all these tweets of him just dropping N-bombs left and right. I'm like, yeah, you dumbass. Like, we've all done stuff. So quit judging other people like you have just been this, like you just came out of the womb and you're just been living this enlightened life. Like, no, you said things, but nobody had a camera on. Nobody was recording it. And I've been talking with people lately because I think we're going to reach this tipping point, or I hope we're reaching this tipping point where all the people who were doing the canceling and the outrage culture, it's coming to them. So soon we're going to get people on this side where it's like, hey, this can happen to anybody. I need to quit joining in this mob. Like, I cannot tell you, I would say 99.9% of the people who made videos about me canceling me, since then, they've all been canceled. Every single one of them. Every single one of them. And I'm just like, I feel bad for them. I wouldn't wish what happened to me on my worst enemy, but they've changed from that experience. They know what it's like now. They know what it's like for people to dig up your shit, to people take you out of context, to people use clips and not, have a nuanced view of you. So I'm hoping we reach that tipping point, and anybody listening to this, like, just realize like you're not an angel. Okay. Like, how many people canceling Joe Rogan have dropped N-bombs with their friends or online or whatever, and it's just like, yeah, maybe you haven't, but I'm sure you said something transphobic. I'm sure you said something that was just really shitty, And fortunately, millions of people didn't hear it. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and it's like
my little rant.
yeah, and it's like when you're on any sort of team, right, whether right or left, I mean, you tend to idealize your side, right? So like a good example of this, and so I'm like a very long time fan of like rap / hip hop music, right? So I have an extensive, I would say, knowledge of like 90s rappers and what their lives were like and things that were going on with them, right? As opposed to like, let's say, their lyrics, which were honestly very much true to form and true to fact, right? So the thing is, like, you have like liberals, right, who on the one hand they're like, oh, you know, like fuck Rogan, right? We want to cancel him. And these are the same people who are enjoying the Super Bowl halftime show, which I loved, right? But the thing is, like, it's like, guys, you love Dr. Dre, right? You think like he's this amazing person. Do you have any idea how many women he spent fucking countless hours beating the shit out of? So remember when Straight Outta Compton came out? Like, you know, that was obviously a great movie or whatever, right? So you had like the sort of the watered down version of NWA. There was actually a counter film that many people don't know about called Surviving Compton. So Miss Chalet, who was, and again, I get it, like most people are like, you know, hip hop heads, they don't get it, right? Like, hey, I like Dr. Dre, Eminem, stuff I saw on MTV, cool, right? So Miss Chalet was a member of not only Death Row Records, but she was actually one of the homies when they were NWA, right? He used to date her. He used to beat the shit out of her every single night. So the movie Surviving Compton was actually about their relationship, right? And so as the movie starts out, right, she's like, oh, I know you guys like saw Straight Outta Compton, but she's like, this is actually the dark side to it. This is the stuff that you're not going to get in the film version of it because it's obviously all glossed over. So, and then that was kind of her relationship with a lot of these guys because she went out with Dre, and I think she also had a relationship with Suge Knight after. He did the same thing because he was kind of a piece of shit, right? So, and this is like the stuff that you don't get. And what was so cool about the movie, and this is something that I could say that made me so happy, was she actually was like, no, like Tupac was actually one of the good ones. Like he wasn't the one doing all that shit. He was actually a really good dude as opposed to the other people. Because she's like, yo, Dr. Dre is like a huge piece of shit, right? And then, you know, people like, no, you know, like, it's one person, yada, yada. Now he gets divorced. His wife is claiming the same stuff. She's like, yo, he used to beat me to like to the pulp, to unconsciousness, right? Where literally I would wake up just a bloody bruised mess, right? So, but my point in saying all of this is that you have liberals who are like really against Joe Rogan, right? And I'm not, look, I can't really even say I know what to think for sure because I don't, I'm on the fence about it. But my point is I can say that like, look, I'm kind of I'm skeptical, right? I don't really know. But then you have like liberals who are like, no, Rogan is a piece of shit, but we love Dr. Dre, right? And even Snoop Dogg, right? Yes, probably Snoop Dogg never did anything terrible, maybe, but if you listen to his lyrics, I'm like, yo, what do you think these guys are glorifying? Like, give me a break. And this is music that I love, right? But I can say like, yeah, man, a lot of the music is really fucked up. And even back in the 90s when you had C. Dolores Tucker, who was like, yeah, you know, these people are like pieces of shit. They're glorifying violence. They're glorifying like beating on women, yada, yada, right? Now, 20 years later, you get Suge Knight, who's like, yeah, man, I think she was right. I think we were kind of scumbags back then. Yeah, no shit, you were, right? Yeah. But again, you know, you have liberals who are like, oh, you know, it's just, you know, a bunch of like poor black dudes and they made their way to the top and, you know, the system was fucking them every single time and they still found the way around it. Yes, that's only part of the story. They did also some really terrible things behind the scenes.
Well, you know, a lot of people do hear these stories and things like that. And like what you're talking about, I think a lot about like separating the art from the artist and stuff. Like, for example, Michael Jackson, right? My middle name's Michael. My original name was going to be Michael Jackson Boute, but my parents were like, nah, because my sister, I was born in 85 when Thriller came out, and my sister wanted to name me Michael Jackson, but they just made my middle name Michael. But anyways, like I love Michael Jackson's music, but his checkered history and the allegations and everything, like, you know, for example, I don't know what to think about it, right? There's a lot of conflicting stories and everything, but what I'm getting at, like, there's this whole art from the artist, but I'll tell you guys a topic that I'm absolutely obsessed with, and any book that comes out on it, I will read it immediately, and it's self-deception, right? Our ability to self-deceive, to dodge cognitive dissonance, to just, you know, like if you just have a conversation with people and just say, like, for example, okay, so explain to me why Joe Rogan's a piece of shit for saying something, but Dr. Dre is not a piece of shit for doing something, right? Like, and just watch the mental gymnastics that people go through. And I love reading books like this. And it's one of the reasons why I just really advocate for people like reading books about psychology, understand how the human mind works. I'll tell you though, it helps me understand my mind, but it doesn't make it easier dealing with other people. Like, I'm sure you guys get this too. The more you learn about yourself and human nature, and you watch other people, you're like, I know why you're doing this, but I fucking hate it, right? It really bothers me. You know what I mean? But it helps me like empathize with them a little bit. But I want people to read because you know, whenever I have psychologists or researchers on who study self-deception and stuff, like I have an upcoming episode with Todd Rose. He wrote an awesome book called Collective Illusions. It's out. Everybody should read it. Huh. And it's like how we all kind of conform and have these lies that we believe together. But anyways, what we're talking about, what he talks about in this episode, what all these people talk about is like just educating yourself about this. Like just pick up Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. Realize how many dumb things your brain does on a daily basis. Like I'm regularly reading like 5 to 10 books. Like I just have them in a rotation. I'll read a chapter here, chapter there. There's always 1 or 2 in them that explains to me how screwed up my brain is and how my biases and heuristics and all these other things. But educating yourself about these things is the best thing that you can do. So you catch yourself. You start to realize, wait, why am I giving Joe Rogan such a hard time? But my best friend is a piece of shit, right? But I'm here on the internet criticizing a stranger, you know, and you start to reflect on your own life. And I think that would be just a great thing for the world, for people to pick up books like this and understand why they think the way they do, you know?
Oh, man. And so I got to ask before we kind of end off, right? How come you got canceled?
Right before we end.
I was like, should we ask that at the end?
No, we've touched on a little bit of it, but yeah, so I started my channel to help people. And basically, I realized, because, you know, I work in marketing too, and I'm like, okay, like my goal is to help people, right? I want to help people. There's a bunch of people, and if you can't afford therapy, if you can't afford treatment, like I don't know how much you charge for sessions, but therapy can be freaking expensive, right? Treatment, like my treatment center, if you went there, $30,000 without insurance. Some people were paying thousands with insurance, right, for their copay deductible. Wow. So I'm like, well, YouTube's free. All you need is an internet connection. And like I said, I was reaching 10, 20 people. But then I realized, if you intertwine pop culture with these topics, so I click people in, like, so for example, if I were to make a YouTube video today, right? Because I'm still kind of traumatized by the experience. But if this was like 2019 Chris, I'd make a video saying like, here's what Kanye West is actually thinking. And then we'd have a conversation about bipolar disorder, right? So I'd bait them in, and then I'd educate them about this, right? Or here's the real reason Kanye and Kim Kardashian got divorced. I'd bait him in, and then I'd explain Kim left him because he refused to take his medications, refused to treat his mental illness. And I would teach the audience, hey, listen, I take my mental health medications. I go to 12-step meetings. I go to therapy, not just for me, but for my son, for my girlfriend, for the people in my life. So I take these pop culture stories and try to teach people. Well, one of the things I did was I would also use YouTubers as an example. And I had my #1 video has almost 1 million views, and it's about a young woman. Her YouTube channel is Illymation, and she really blew up. She's an animator, and she made a 3-part series about this abusive relationship she was in, right? We're talking about like gaslighting, domestic violence. I think sexual assault was in there, right? And a lot of people in the YouTube community were like attacking her, and, you know, the whole victim blaming. There's a part where she says like, you know, she went to the cops and they didn't listen. So I'll use these kind of stories. Like I would explain to people like, listen, a lot of victims of sexual assault don't go to the police because they keep hearing stories about other people being ignored by the police. So anyways, that's how I do it. I ended up collaborating with Illymation. She's like, thank you. Like, you helped me realize like I need to go to therapy for some of this shit I went through. So a lot of YouTubers thanked me, but then a few YouTubers didn't like what I was doing, right? And as far as philosophy goes, I'm very utilitarian, you know, where I'm like, if you're broadcasting your abusive relationship to the world, I think I have a right to make a video saying, hey, this is what an abusive relationship looks like. I use my experience of previous abusive relationships. And a lot of people loved it. My channel exploded. We started building a mental health community, just peer support. I started a Discord. I had a Facebook group. People were helping each other. I was constantly getting messages, emails. Like I had to like stop reading my messages and develop a new system because I was getting so many. And this isn't to toot my own horn, but that's how massive this was. And I'm only one guy, so that's why I built this peer support community. But anyways, YouTubers started coming after me. The reason why I worded it earlier, and I said, hey, I'm like peer support, is because one of the number one hate videos about me was the fake therapist, right? So a rumor started that I was claiming I was a licensed therapist, even though there's not one video. So that's another thing that's an issue with cancel culture. Once people put the bullseye on you, narratives start, misinformation starts. And that's another reason why I talk a lot about misinformation. But yeah, because of tribalism, right? Because there's people who rally around YouTubers like, how dare you talk about this person, or whatever. And that's kind of what happened. But because of social media algorithms, there was a period in time where if you even put the Rewired Soul in the title of your video, you were guaranteed thousands of views. So, I try to educate myself about incentives, like how we're all driven by incentives. You had people with small channels all of a sudden blowing up because they were making hate videos about me. Wow. And, we do things that work, right? So all of a sudden, some no-name channel makes a video that says the Rewired Soul sucks. They get thousands of views after only getting 100. What are they going to do? They're like, okay, how can I make another video about it? How can I make another video? And then eventually you start making videos just bullshitting. Like people started saying that my mom isn't actually a psychologist. I had one YouTuber say that my girlfriend doesn't actually exist and I'm just pretending to be her online. Like shit gets crazy, man. Yeah. But yeah, so that's kind of how it spiraled. And there is like a moral and ethical conversation to be had about the method I was using. But one of my good friends and mentors, Roberto Blake, he's a creative entrepreneur. He's on YouTube. Everybody should check him out. Like he taught me a lot about creating, making a living off creating and stuff like that. But he's, he tweeted out the other day, like the same thing that Chris got canceled for is what people are getting like 1 million subscribers for today. So it's this weird, it's one of the reasons I learned about cognitive dissonance. Like, why is it okay for this person to do, like people are taking my strategy and blowing up on YouTube, but I got canceled for it, right? And it took like, I was about to relapse. I was borderline suicidal. I had to go into therapy. I had to start going to meetings every single day. So like I said, I just educated myself. And it's one of the reasons a lot of my content focuses on tribalism and misinformation and just so many things that happened to me. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Why are people acting like this? So that's kind of the short of it. So I hope I summarized that well. But everybody can go grab a copy of my book, Canceled. And that kind of outlines it in a little bit more detail. I do need to do an updated version because I didn't understand the psychology behind it and some of the moral questions and stuff. So I've been really thinking about revisiting it with everything I've learned over the last 3 years, just reading and talking with people and stuff.
Yeah, because it's easy to personalize something like that.
Yeah. And, I like I said earlier, I hope everybody realizes, like, don't think you're immune from this. Like the first real big story of someone getting canceled was Justine Sacco. She made a joke about going to Africa, hoping she doesn't get AIDS, says, JK, I'm white. And by the time she landed in Africa, she was fired from her job and everybody knew her name. Like that's how soon it happened. So like she was just like a no name, right? This can happen to anybody. And we like to believe it can never happen to us. But I'm telling you, like, again, like just using you guys as an example, you guys become top 3 podcasts tomorrow, people are going to start going through your shit. Like, people started digging up my old Facebook posts from when I like, they would post like in the videos, they'd be like, look at what he said in 2009. I'm like, hey, I just drank a bottle of Bacardi and popped a few pills when I wrote that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, of course, if you pull up my old posts from when I was in my drug addiction, you're going to see some fucked up shit, So yeah, cancel culture bad.
And just to sort of put a bow on it, because like I didn't expect us to end with that question. So instead, this could be like sort of one of the last questions.
Hey, I'm always willing to come back too if we want to continue this conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
How did you how do you come back from being canceled?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, because I wasn't asked that earlier, but then you asked that question. I'm like, oh no, I'm trying to respect this time, but yeah, we should probably answer that before.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm good on time too. My son's busy, girlfriend's doing some homework and stuff. So, but how did I bounce back? It took a lot. Like we were talking about earlier, these small little wins, right? It took me a while to come back and make content and things like that. Like it's been like this month, I think February is 3 years since it happened. I still get random shitty comments like, hey, you piece of shit, right? And stuff like that, but it's a lot less than when it first happened. But what helped me the most is right now, and I'm sure you guys notice it too, there's people who have made their brand like trying to get canceled just so they can bitch about cancel culture. Screw those people. I don't like it. It's like this, you know, it's like, it's almost like trying to be the victim, and it's really weird.
Yes.
But anyways, but there's another group of people who are speaking out. They're not afraid to say what they think. It's one of the reasons I talk about free speech and stuff like that. Like, hey, like, you know, I may disagree with Rogan on the science and everything that he's doing, but I believe he has a right to say it and we can have a conversation. But anyways, there are people who basically have given me courage, right? From what they're doing. Like they'll write an article or they'll send out a tweet where it's like, I think a great example is Sam Harris, right? Sam Harris lost me for a while. Like Sam Harris helped me out so much in my sobriety. Like I would like do something to get him on my podcast. Like that guy helped save my life. His book, Waking Up, Spirituality Without Religion. I'm like, oh shit. Because like I said, I was like an atheist in AA and it was a little hard, but his book really helped me out a lot. But anyways, I loved Sam. Then I kind of broke away from him. I was like, Sam, you're getting a little weird for me. But recently, I'm like, I respect the hell out of that dude. He has gone against his tribe, right? Like he disagrees with stuff Rogan's been doing. He's been disagreeing with stuff that Peterson's doing. And I think Sam Harris is a good example of kind of like what you were talking about, right? Like you can disagree with some of what Rogan's doing, but to just have this black and white thinking of like, oh, he's a piece of shit now. Like Sam Harris isn't afraid to have a nuanced conversation and realize that a person isn't just one thing. You know what I mean? Like Sam Harris did a short episode recently, like, hey, I've known Rogan for years. I don't think he's a racist, right? Even though Sam Harris has criticized the scientists or doctors he's had on who are anti-vax. So anyways, when I see stuff like that, every one of those things gives me a little bit more courage. And I do think since this happened to me in 2019 and now, like I said, the pendulum is kind of swinging the other way, that I know that if it happened to me today, I have a support system, right? Because when it initially happened to me, one of the hardest things was, like I was saying, all the people who messaged me and said, hey, Chris, you helped me. Hey, Chris, like you saved my life. Hey, Chris, you encouraged me to go to therapy. I had one or two people actually come to my treatment center in Las Vegas and say, hey, Chris, I saw your videos, even though I never said where I worked, so that's kind of creepy. But I had people who one day said, Chris, you helped save my life, to the next day making videos about me being a piece of shit. Like those people would turn on their camera. A lot of my friends, like even my best friends who I've known since childhood, they're like, Chris, I love you. I'm here for you, but I can't talk about your situation publicly because I can't handle all these people coming after me. You know what I mean? So what I'm saying is today, I think if it were to happen, I have a support system of people who would publicly say, no, I know Chris and he's not the person that you guys are saying. So all that stuff has given me courage, and that's helped me kind of bounce back. And you know, sometimes I write Substack pieces going against my leftist progressive tribe. Like I don't have a problem calling them out, you know, because there's other people that do it too. And I just think we need more people talking, speaking up, breaking away from that tribal groupthink and all that stuff, and just encourage one another, because we need to have conversations. And most of all, we need to be able to disagree without hating each other. Like, I don't know when that happened, but it really it breaks my heart to be like, hey, we disagree, therefore you should probably die. Like, what? I don't get that. So it seems a little extreme to me. So
oh man, I love that. That's such a great like ending point, I think. So Alan, before we wrap up, did you want to say something else?
No, I was going to ask.
Okay, go for it.
If we wanted to follow your work, where can we find?
Instagram and Twitter at the Rewired Soul. I'm more active on Twitter, the Rewired Soul Podcast, where I bring on authors. I do bonus episodes too, because there's a lot of interesting people who haven't written a book. So I have them on because I still want to talk to them. Like I have an episode with Rob Henderson coming on today. He's a cool guy. But yeah, so the podcast, Instagram, Twitter, and yeah, I've self-published some books. They're all available on Kindle, or you can go to my website, the rewiredsoul.com, and buy them directly. Most of them are mental health, addiction recovery, but I also wrote about my experience being canceled if you want to get the first person account from start to finish. So,
I love that.
Awesome.
And I know I said this before to you, obviously, but it's worth reiterating for our audience. So Chris legitimately has one of the top 3 podcasts that I listen to. So so to me, you're up there with Sam Harris, the Michael Shermer show, which I obviously love because Shermer's our guy, right? And I would even, I'm not like a huge fan of Joe Rogan, but damn, man, like you're up there too, in my mind.
Thanks, man. That means a lot. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks.
Anytime.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
Take care. All right. First of all,
epic, right?
Awesome.
Another epic episode. Yep.
Listen, guys, if you want to follow us, you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time.